Welcome to this episode of Our College Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. This is the next in our series of thought leader interviews. This special series of interviews is designed to help prepare college leaders for a future visioning activity taking place in summer 2021. We're adding all of these interviews where the participants have allowed it for our entire college community to hear. In this episode, Fred Payne, Commissioner of the Department of Workforce Development for the state of Indiana, shares his thoughts on the future of work. I really appreciated how Mr. Payne reflected on how COVID has changed his work and the work of his team, but more so, how we once again see the theme of collaboration coming out in these interviews. We have to collaborate to solve the big challenges that face society. In this case, it is the need of employers for well-trained employees and for employees to find, to quote Mr. Payne, right-sized jobs for them. I know you're going to enjoy listening to this interview.
So would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role and your organization that you're representing today?
My name is Fred Payne. I serve as the Commissioner of the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. And our agency is the state agency for employment and reemployment services throughout the state, which covers employment training, ensuring that we engage with employers to understand their training needs, apprenticeship and work-based learning programs, as well as administering the state's unemployment insurance trust fund.
What are the big problems that you are trying to solve personally and with your agency?
The bigger issues that we're trying to solve is to ensure that we're moving people from unemployment and underemployment to employment, or to what I call right-size employment, meaning the employment that they desire to have. And we want to ensure that we're also providing employers with a pool of skilled employees from which they can help bolster their employment at their places of work.
What's an interesting trend that you have discovered with your stakeholders that you think is going to change the way in which we work?
I think over the past few years, employers and stakeholders have really started to understand that workforce development and economic development and employment is not the type of enterprise that's led by one entity and one entity only. So what we've seen over the years is that we've had more partners who want to be engaged and who want to work in the workforce development space to ensure that we have a good foundation for our economic future. So I think that has been a trend that we've seen that's been on the increase. So that's forced more collaboration, and also see that what's happened over the past few years, the trend of really doing things more virtually, and that's been put on steroids with the pandemic.
How has what your agency done transformed directly as a result of COVID?
On the workforce training side and delivering those services, it's transformed actually how we deliver the services. Before the pandemic, we had a variety of services that we had hybrid approaches to delivering them on some platforms. But when COVID came into play, we had to make sure that we were providing the same or similar services to clients. And we couldn't do that in person. So we quickly had to adjust to virtual platforms. And we've done that in practically all of the areas that we serve. So it's quickly allowed us to use different platforms to reach our population.
So as you think about your industry now, assuming we find a post-COVID, we find something that is actually after this is all over, what do you look like in your work in the immediate term, 5 years from now and 10 years from now?
Obviously, the different platforms that we're using to deliver services. But we also see from the types of needs that employers are having, we're seeing a higher skilled employee needed. A person is going to need a higher level of skill over the next few years and beyond. We do have a goal in Indiana of reaching 60% of our population who are adult age having a post-secondary credential. That's becoming much more important. And I think that that's accelerated the need for it because of COVID. We're seeing that the jobs that folks could have been remote, those people by and large are able to do so because they have some type of post-secondary credential. So in a post-COVID world, we will have more of those, and we will have more jobs that employers are able to utilize remote workers because they will invest a little bit more in digital technology and some automated technology that will allow them more flexibility.
I want to dig into that with you just a little bit more, if you'll allow me. I interviewed Mitch Daniels this morning for one of these thought leader interviews, and then also thinking about the Taking Hoosiers to the Next Level program, which we've worked in partnership with your agency on. And we've seen a lot of people who have come back to Ivy Tech, even though they already have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, even doctoral degrees, and they're skilling up in different ways. And President Daniels talked this morning when I interviewed him about, we have to rethink that college mentality in Indiana. What skills are most in demand, or what do you see in terms of the future of workforce in Indiana that we should focus the most on, or what areas might we have the biggest gaps in?
First off, just from a foundational level, things like critical thinking, problem solving, and really addressing risk, right? Risk management, those types of things, in my opinion, are foundational. And I think we need more of that. And people who've mastered those things, they can by and large move in and out of different job scenarios based upon skill. They can get the skill pretty quickly if they have that foundation. In terms of actual trends in employment, as I mentioned earlier, the digitization of things is going to increase. And people who are able to move from a non-digital job to a digital job, or a job that requires them to operate, whether it's machinery or to operate from a computer-based type of platform, that's just going to increase, because that's really where our jobs are going. You think about the cloud. Years ago, we had so much data and information stored on a big machine in a cold room, right? Now that seems to be less of that because of cloud technology. And the individuals who are able to maneuver in environments, and I'm using this more of an analogy than anything else, are able to move from sort of that standalone room where files were stored to this cloud that we really don't see, but we know information is out there. The individual who's able to move between that type of world, from the physical to the digital and a cloud-based economy and a knowledge-based economy, those are the people who will fare best, as we see in the years to come.
What is higher education? What do we need to do differently to help people get there? And specifically to Ivy Tech, if there's anything really specific for us, but how do we help people get to that location?
I think part of it is to really start to understand the real value proposition of education. The value proposition of education has not lessened. It's actually increased because of the types of jobs that you have to, there's, sort of some specified learning that you need. So I do believe that, one, we have to focus on individuals who are leaving high school or who are re-entering the workforce, to really focus on the value of what education means. And education, I'm talking about anything from a short-term certification all the way through a PhD or that. It's not just one category. So when I talk about education, I speak about it in terms of a pair, education and training, because I think they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So one, focus on the value proposition. And then two, what we should continue to focus on really is how education is changing so rapidly. There'll always be the need and the desire to make sure that we're reading the classics, we're reading the books, and we're getting all of the understanding and knowledge that that type of training brings. That will continue to be important. But as we continue to move into a knowledge-based environment where people are actually not physically touching things, but they're virtually touching things, our mode of education needs to move beyond just simply reading and taking a test or actually physically touching a machine, but really to really understanding what underlies the technology that underlies, what's being taught in a book and what's being put out in the workforce, and some of the systems that it takes to really run, whether it's the machinery or to do some type of data analysis. So moving our education in a way that focuses on those things gets us to, I think, a post-COVID and actually beyond the next 5, 10, 15 years. and to really be able to teach on multiple platforms. I think that's critical as well. I think the days of where learning is only taking place in a classroom environment on a campus, I think that is becoming less and less of the model. It will always be a part of the fabric, but it won't be the only part of the fabric. Then also teaching at an institution like a business, teaching at, say, a hospital, or even teaching at some other site or location that gives an individual sort of a visual of where they will be applying their skills is important. And then obviously the digital piece, the virtual piece, really honing that and working out the technology where we can deliver that in a better way.
How do you think the future of work is going to look different in 10 years?
Well, some of what I just said.
Right.
The need to have students, the need to have students in brick and mortar. I think one thing that the pandemic has shown us that we can do is that we can deliver educational and training services outside of brick and mortar only. There are some things that are not easily transferable to a virtual platform. So we have to make sure that we're keeping those things intact. But I also believe that employers will play a bigger role in the way that we educate and train in the future. The one thing that we know right now is that change is occurring at the slowest rate that it will be, right? So even though our rate of change is happening pretty quickly right now, we know that it's going to be happening even quicker later. And if our education is going to change with that, then there needs to be a real attachment between educational institutions and industry. If we're talking about, I don't know, let's say stock market, how information is delivered, the different types of currencies used, those are the types of things that need to be taught in the classroom, but we don't have 2 years to develop that curriculum because Bitcoin and that type of currency has happened just like that. And if we wait for 3 years to start teaching it in the classroom, then we've missed an entire lifetime actually of Bitcoin and that type of currency. If we're talking about the technology that's maybe in a manufacturing facility with automation, if employers aren't connected, then they may be teaching to yesterday's technology when the automation has moved at the speed of light. And again, educational institutions haven't kept up with it. So that's why I believe that engagement with educational institutions and industry is ever so important.
Are there any other thoughts you just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share with our leadership?
I think you capture them in the questions, but I will reiterate this, the notion of collaboration and engagement. I do believe that engagement is it's the secret sauce, I think, to education and training. And I think of it this way. If we have engagement between employers, educators, and the community, then we've got an input from all of the stakeholders we need to develop then the training and education. But we can't develop the training and education without the engagement. So I think that that's really critical. After we've had the engagement and we've developed the training and the educational components, there needs to be sort of a reflection or reflective period built in. I think we've all gotten into situations where we've established goals. We may establish a 12-month or 18-month goal, and we're charging ahead for that 18 months. But 6 months into it, we realized that we needed to tweak things a little bit. And it's a little more difficult to change something 6 months in than it is to change it 20 days in. So I think as we continue to move forward, this kind of reflection and review needs to be built in to the very fabric of what we do in education and training. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave here without focusing a little bit on the importance of the engagement, but also what's equally important is the reflection and review part of that.
I love that. I love that focus on making sure that we're thinking about the change we're making, looking at it on a regular basis and evaluating and adjusting as we need to. That's wonderful.
Well, thank you guys so much for having a dialogue with me. I really appreciate it. And anytime I can be of assistance, I'm just a phone call or an email away.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Our College, Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. You can connect with me on Twitter at KNMTweets. Our producer is Sarah Ferguson. For this special series of episodes, we want to thank our guest producers, Gretchen Keller and Kristen Moreland. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices@ivytech.edu. If you're a member of our Ivy Tech faculty and staff, please join our Microsoft Teams listener community. I send out instructions to our entire college community on how to do that every Thursday. Our website is www.ivytech.edu/podcast. You'll find links to show notes and more on that page. Production assistance for this and every episode provided by Becky Campbell and the Ivy Tech Community College Creative Services team. Our podcast concept is by Matthew Pittman. Theme music and post-production services provided by the incredibly talented Jen Yeeds at the Brassie Broadcasting Company. We'll talk to you next time on Our College, Your Voices.